Good morning, everyone. My name is Danielle Tong, and I will be helping out today with the forum. Thank you for joining us for Select the Right Technological Solution and How to Get the Right Fit for Your Organization. I am thrilled to have Margie Bland with us, founder and principal at the Inspired Connections and senior consultant with Taproot. She has 15 years of experience in the nonprofit sector in various positions that place her in an intersection in between people and change management. And today she's going to be talking with us about wading through the sea of options that a nonprofit might have with regards to technology and how to really make the best choices for you. A little bit of housekeeping before we get started. This webinar features closed captioning, and if you'd like to either show or hide those subtitles, please look at the bottom right-hand bar of your screen. It says live transcription. Once you click that, it will say show or hide subtitles. If you'd like to change the size of those subtitles, you can select subtitle settings and select the different size there. If you'd like to move the subtitles around the screen, you can click and drag those subtitles anywhere that works for you on the screen. This section is being recorded because it's a webinar. None of the attendees are recorded and none of their identities are captured here, but the panelists will be recorded today along with the slide, which gives accessibility post-forum. Speaking of accessibility post-forum, if you have registered using Eventbrite, you will be sent an email after the forum that contains a link to view this later, in addition to some post-forum resources that Margie has graciously provided us. And finally, a survey that helps us stay in tune with what best meets your needs with the Nonprofit Forum series. The Q&A box and the chat section are a little different from the way other folks use them. If you have technology issues, technological concerns, or you need technical assistance with this forum, please go ahead and place those questions in the chat box. We have that chat box monitored by someone who can help specifically answer questions around how to use Zoom, how to interact with Zoom. If you have content-related questions for Margie, for example, you would want to put those in the Q&A box. Throughout the event, please monitor the Q&A box for the questions that are being asked. You have the opportunity to upvote any specific question that you would like to hear answered, and that helps me moderate which questions are burning topics that folks really want to hear about, and how to prioritize our Q&A section. If you don't see the question that you would like to have asked there, please go ahead and type it into the Q&A box. And with that, I am thrilled to bring along Margie.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that gracious introduction, Danielle. I'm very excited to be here and to connect with all of you. And I'm going to trust that Danielle will speak up and let me know if for some reason my screen is not showing. But again, I think Danielle did a great job of giving you a little bit of background or a little bit of information about my background, but particularly for local folks, you'll see there, or local to Central Ohio, I've started my career at Hands on Central Ohio, and I'll date myself a little bit and share that when I started, it was First Link. So many, many years ago, and served really as a connector of volunteers to nonprofits. I then joined the Points of Light team, where I supported a network of volunteer action centers around the world. Did a little bit of contract work with March of Dimes. And then very recently, I have spent about 4 years as a senior consultant with Common Impact, and really focusing on both nonprofit and corporate social responsibility consulting, with a real focus on pro bono or skills-based volunteering. And I'm going to share kind of how that experience has inform my perspective on technology selection. And my role there really was assessing challenges and defining solutions for nonprofits. Most recently, I have formed my own consulting organization called Inspired Connections, where I'm working with small to medium-sized companies to help build out their corporate social responsibility and community engagement programming, as well as my favorite thing, which is nonprofit capacity building and infrastructure consulting. So working directly with nonprofits to understand their needs and define solutions. Very, very brand new. I am also doing a bit of consulting work with Taproot, which is another organization that provides corporate social responsibility consulting to larger companies with a focus on pro bono or skills-based volunteering. And so again, I get to do my favorite work, which is consulting with nonprofits to scope challenges into discrete projects that can be tackled by pro bono consultants. So a little bit about what we'll go over today. Of course, you all know that we're going to discuss how we find the right technology fit for our organizations. I'm going to give a disclaimer. My role today is not going to be to recommend or prioritize specific technologies. It is really to highlight the process and to highlight some of the challenges that we all have in trying to identify the right technology fit for our organizations. Because as we all know, as nonprofits, we have some unique challenges in that regard. So we're going to talk very briefly about some of the key systems and processes that we use technology for. I'm going to talk a little bit about the types of technologies, enterprise, functional, and legacy. And then on a high level review, the approach to selection. We're going to really dig into that process of finding the right fit. And I'm going to say it again and again, the right fit is going to be a bit different for everybody. So you won't leave here today with a specific vendor or technology solution identified. But the goal is for you to leave here today really feeling grounded in the process for how to find that right fit. So we'll talk about how do you technology goals, which is different than defining your functional or technical needs. We'll talk about how do we research and then compare to technologies, and then we'll spend a bit of time on that selection and implementation. I've also included both in this deck and with your follow-up materials some free resources and places where you can find even far more expertise than what I'm sharing, along with some templates and tools. And then, of course, as Danielle shared, we'll pause and leave plenty of time for questions. And I'll encourage you all to post those questions in the chat box window, and Danielle will work with me on identifying those. All right, so let's dive right into a little bit about some of the common challenges. As I shared, I spent a lot of time connecting and consulting directly with nonprofits. Because of the nature of the work that I've done, I tended to work with a lot of technology volunteers who were specifically looking for projects where they could utilize their technology expertise and skills to support infrastructure capacity building challenges with nonprofits. And so my role and our role at Common Impact, and along with Taproot as well, is to connect with nonprofits and to go through a consulting and assessment process to really understand both their needs, but the underlying needs as well. And so some of the common challenges we saw, I'm sure that we'll see some things here that are relevant to all of us, right? Website and social media expertise, not having a social media expert on staff, data collection and storage. I know that's something that's becoming increasingly important for nonprofits as our funders and stakeholders are really driving us to be data informed. Remote access and collaboration, something that was certainly brought to the forefront in 2020, and I think continues to be a priority for a lot of us. Data security, so making sure that funder and donor and volunteer data is secure, encrypted, all of those things. I have to say, the most common challenge that we would hear from our nonprofit partners was technology and vendor selection, which initially was very surprising to me. The reality is that we have a lot of technology resources at our disposal. As nonprofits, we even have access to some free technologies. So Microsoft Office, for example, has a nonprofit program. Salesforce has a nonprofit program. TechSoup is an area or is a spot that we can go to find free or significantly reduced cost resources as well. However, as we spoke with nonprofits, we found that they were just really having a tough time with finding the right fit. So I heard a lot of times, we don't know where to start. And so I'm sure I've highlighted here on this slide a lot of the different challenges. And so as you read through these, kind of think about what, if any of these kind of resonate with you. So the need for a technology solution or a software or a vendor can come from nearly any process or program for an organization. So many of the challenges that you see here are probably pretty common in your organizations, from needing to update a process from paper-based to something online, to decreasing work silos. So thinking about how your programs team works really closely with all of the data, and then that doesn't necessarily translate to your development team who needs that data to write compelling grants or compelling asks and things like that. So those are all of the different types of things that we would hear. Over and over, I would hear from nonprofits that were sure that they needed a technology solution. We just don't know where to start. And so our goal today is to really to help to give you the confidence and the skills and the steps for understanding the process of technology selection so that you feel really confident on where to start. Now, certainly none of our processes are going to be exactly the same. We're all going to be in a little bit of a different kind of selection journey, and the outcomes aren't going to be the same. The right fit for your organization is not going to be the same as it is for the organization next door. But we're going to talk about how we can kind of get a lot of different input and a lot of and to pull in some of those diverse perspectives. I love this quote here from Patrick Callahan, who's the Executive Director of Tech Impact. This is a resource that I've highlighted for you in the material, so you'll be able to kind of dig into the great work that they're doing. But he likens the selection of technology to hiring a staff person. So think about the work that goes into developing a job description. So the functions or the tasks that a specific person will complete. And then you identify kind of what are those skills or what's that expertise that we want that person to have so that they can complete these job functions. And then, of course, you're comparing and ultimately selecting a single person over others to fill that role. And so that really, I think, helps to set a really great framework for how we approach a technology selection. All right, so let's talk just a little bit about technology, about the role of technology in the nonprofit sector. Again, I know you all are really, I'm not going to dive too deeply into it because I know we're all very aware. We've all read the articles and seen all the research about the fact that technology is going to revolutionize the nonprofit sector, right? So a best practice is for nonprofits to embrace technology and innovate to solve all of our problems and be data informed. But one of my personal frustrations is that message is rarely accompanied by a how-to, right? Like, how do I identify the right fit technology for my organization? How do I pay for it? How do I keep it up to date? How do I make sure that it integrates with some of my other, some of my other processes? What we also see is that a lot of times, a lot of that research might be coming from a Salesforce or a Blackbaud. Still great information, great research, but from a specific vendor, right? So they're going to kind of share that within the context of, and this is why our technology solution is so great. So we wanted to kind of take that, let's take that step back and just kind of agnostic of any specific technology, let's think about what that process should look like. All right, so fairly obvious here. Let's just kind of think about, I think, as a framing piece. Let's think about the different ways that we use technology in our organizations. Whether you're within a specific department or program at your organization, or you're overseeing lots of these. All of the different ways, from the way we send our emails to our individual emails to our mass emails. How do we manage our programs? Fundraising, do you have a CRM? Volunteer coordination, are you using something to keep track of volunteer hours or have volunteers sign up? Data collection utilization is one of those things that we are continuing to prioritize, continuing to be driven by. So just kind of thinking about all of the different types of processes in which we use technology. And it's likely nearly everything. So I think that this highlights a bit of the disconnect that we as a sector understand and embrace the benefits of technology. So as you see here, 85% of nonprofits really believe that technology is an integral key to success. But it can be really challenging to put a long-term or cohesive plan in place, right? We're unsure of maybe kind of where our budget is 3 to 5 years from now. We're not sure what might grow or change. You know, there's staffing considerations, and so that long-term strategy can be very challenging. I have included in the resources that you'll receive after this presentation a really simple template for laying out kind of a long-term IT strategy. In a perfect world, you are utilizing the steps in this presentation for finding the right technology as part of a long-term IT strategy. But we understand we're not always operating within a perfect world, but just something to think about as you're kind of continuing to embrace technology. All right, so let's talk a little bit. I'm going to dive deeper into each of these three things. But I wanted to highlight some of the different types of technology that we might see. And again, my goal is to not recommend one type over the other, but for us to get an understanding and a framework of the different ways that we might approach our challenges with a technology solution. So when we think about an enterprise solution, we're thinking about our Salesforces, our Blackbauds of the world. So this is something, an enterprise solution is a technology solution that manages multiple aspects of an organization's operations and processes. And I've got a slide that I think will really highlight this, but you also might think of like Microsoft Office, something that almost most of us are likely familiar with and utilize. So think about the fact that it manages your email, your calendar, your document storage. You might be using Microsoft Teams, and so it's also your webinar or your meeting technology. So it's a kind of enterprise or holistic solution. Or a functional solution. So this is something that might manage one aspect of an organization's operations or processes. So most likely you are using something, Zoom. Zoom could be considered a functional technology because we're kind of doing one thing, one process or one program. Some other ones that I'll highlight, again, not recommending anything specific, but Volgistics, that's a volunteer management technology solution. I've used Volunteer Hub and Volunteer Manager before. So that's kind of one functional piece or process that technology is managing. Constant Contact is another one that folks might be really familiar with. So you're using that for your mass emails, right? Hootsuite or Zoho is, something that's used to calendar social media, right? And then we get to our legacy systems. So these are typically older, maybe something that's already in-house. It might be kind of the first piece of technology that was used at your organization for a specific process. And one of the challenges that we frequently run into with nonprofits is, how do I sunset that technology? So we are using, I think actually Microsoft Access is a great example. There's likely some of us that, and myself included, have used that as our database technology, and Microsoft is sunsetting themselves. They're sunsetting that technology. And so we're going to say, okay, we have so much historical data in there. We need to find a new solution. I've also worked with organizations that had just a really dated, very highly customized Oracle database that housed so much information. So it felt very challenging to think about, how do we transition? Or we might be guilty of just having a bunch of Excel sheets that track every volunteer and donor, and then it's a completely manual process. And so let's dive into each of these just a little bit more. For our enterprise solution, I wanted to highlight just kind of, again, Salesforce is, you'll hear me mention Salesforce because I think it's a very prevalent technology. It's one that I've used and have had good experiences with. I like to share though, in one of my consulting sessions, somebody shared, of course, Salesforce can be free to nonprofits, and so certainly an option to look at. And she shared with me, free Salesforce is like a free puppy. So if you're looking and you feel ready for a puppy, then get the free puppy. But if you're not ready for it, then it might not be the right choice for you at the time. So just because you hear me mention Salesforce so many times, I wanted to just make sure to share that little anecdote. But I use this slide as a visual to see what an enterprise solution might look like. And so let's say we have an instance of Salesforce or Blackbaud, and it's managing all of our volunteer scheduling along with all that volunteer data. We're storing documents in it. We're storing our donor and fundraising and client data in, and we're tracking maybe even our how our staff is approaching their professional development. So just a visual, I think with our enterprise solutions, it's helpful to have that visual. All right, so let's talk a bit more deeply about what are some of those benefits and challenges and considerations. If we are thinking that we want to purchase an enterprise solution like a Salesforce or Blackbaud, or again, there's many others, there are lots of benefits to having a single solution. So let's even take a look back. As you can see, kind of, okay, we've got one system that's managing all of these pieces. It sounds great, right? But let's think about what some of those benefits and challenges might be. You've got a single solution for staff to learn and train on. Typically the training might be a bit more challenging because the systems are complex, but at least it's one system. It's kind of, it's one thing to learn. You can decrease silos. So if our client data and our volunteer data, or I'm sorry, if our donor data and our volunteer data are in the same place or in the same system, it can be pretty easy to compare those two. So you might be able to decrease silos within your work. Typically, they're also very highly customizable, which can be a huge benefit with both data tracking and reporting. And so customizing your own field, customizing your own reports or dashboards, those can all be really beneficial because again, nothing is going to be a one-size-fits-all approach. And so typically when you're making an investment into a large enterprise system, put that work in to help it to make sure it fits your needs and is customized. However, and I think one other piece that's really helpful to mention is that many of these integrate with other popular technologies, right? So if a technology like a Blackbaud is really well known, then it's likely going to integrate. I know that a lot of us are using something like QuickBooks for our accounting. And so not having to kind of manually or do double entry. So, so looking for some of those integrations. So the more kind of widely utilized or widely known the technology is, the more likely it is to integrate with some of those important tools that you're already using. All right, so some of the challenges is it can really have a very steep learning curve. So Salesforce, again, I'll utilize that. I have utilized it and really like it. However, it takes a while. It really does. It has its own language. It has its own logic. And every technology is like that. And so kind of the more complex, the more functions that a technology is managing, the steeper the learning curve is going to be. And so it's important to think about, okay, well, is an enterprise solution right for us? Do we have the appetite, the time, and the capacity to truly train our staff on this complex technology? It's also unlikely to be a perfect solution for all programs. And so I've run into this before as well with organizations that I've worked with, where we have a solution that could, for example, support the collaboration or collaborating on documents. But one person on staff just really loves using Google Docs. And so now, although we've purchased this technology that allows us to collaborate on documents, now we're also using Google Docs for other pieces. I've also had situations, for example, where one department was using Constant Contact and another department was using Silverpop. And so those two things, separate technologies, even though we could integrate through Salesforce. And so you have to make sure that if we are implementing an enterprise solution, that all of the different programs and all of the different teams are willing to be flexible and recognize that, okay, this might not be the absolute perfect solution for your team, but is it good enough to be able to implement? And does the benefit of having one enterprise solution that manages all of these processes, does that benefit outweigh the fact that it's a little clunky for the marketing team, or it's not exactly perfect for your program, for your programs team? Again, case by case basis. Typically, these can be fairly costly, your larger technologies. Again, there are lots of free resources, so I highly encourage you to avail yourself of those. But there's typically a cost, including kind of, subscription, licensing fees, training, customization, consultants, and then of course the time. Your time is valuable, and so these enterprise solutions do require that investment of time. Training is important and ongoing. I can't. It's always such a shame to see, but I have seen so many nonprofits, and I've certainly been guilty of this myself, of having access or making the investment and commitment into a really robust technology tool, and then just not training their staff or not staying up to date on the newest features, not requiring all staff to kind of get on board and get engaged. And so that's another kind of, there's certainly a resource cost there. And so before executing an enterprise solution, I really encourage nonprofits to identify and consider these challenges as well. And so when we think about the consideration, so how similar are the needs of your different programs and teams? So if it makes sense for one department to be working outside the system because their needs are so unique, okay, we can make that work. But if we're going to have multiple teams or departments that are operating or executing processes outside of this enterprise solution, does it really make sense? Was that investment truly worth it? Is this also something that can grow with you? We also recognize that, again, we might be sunsetting certain programs, adjusting them. We might get a grant to run a brand new program. And so will this technology solution grow with us? Is it customizable to the point that we could run a new process or program through it? Or do we think, hey, we're in our lane, we have maybe a niche mission, it's not likely to grow. And so a more simple technology solution we see will work for us for the next 3 to 5 years. And if that's the situation you're in, then that's a great approach. And again, is leadership bought in? So not just, hey, yes, it would be great if we implemented Blackbot, or yeah, I'd like a new CRM. Have they identified, is there budget from the board of directors? Is leadership going to utilize this technology? Are they going to be, again, kind of an example, a leader in utilizing the technology? I myself have worked for organizations and have done consulting with organizations where we purchase Salesforce or Blackbot, and the leadership team just never figures out how to use it. So we're still in the same situation of manually pulling reports and then translating them into whatever system or whatever Excel setup the CEO would like to have. And so that certainly doesn't mean that everybody has to be an expert, but it really is both around the utilization and really even the culture. So think about it as being part of your culture to utilize this technology. And is everybody kind of on board and going to do it? If they're, again, we're seeing that the CEO is, just unwilling to learn and is going to operate kind of over here outside of this system, then that's going to really filter down to the rest of staff. And I always just feel like I find that to be just an unfortunate, it can be just kind of an unfortunate underutilization of resources. All right, and then let's talk a bit about functional solutions. And these, again, I know we've spent a lot of time on enterprise solutions because if we're implementing an enterprise solution, there's so very many considerations. But let's also talk about what are those functional solutions? So what are those smaller, less complex technologies that might just support one or two of our processes or programs? I think QuickBooks is a great example, right? So we're really kind of running our accounting and finance through QuickBooks. We're not managing our program data. And so it's just really important basically for our accounting and maybe grant team to be experts in it. So it's likely then to fit a specific program's needs very closely. So we're not going to have that trade-off where the programs team loves Blackbaud for the way that it can track client data, but it's really tough. The fundraising or development team is really struggling because they're not able to pull the reports that they need, or they have to do a lot of workarounds in order to pull those reports. Okay, so we're not likely to have that trade-off here. They're typically less complex, so it's a bit easier for staff to kind of master the technology. And it's likely fewer staff. So as you can imagine, kind of training 30 staff on Salesforce is quite a bit of a larger undertaking than training 2 to 3 folks on QuickBooks. They're typically more cost effective, right? So simpler technology, lower price tag. And sometimes, again, if you don't need that free puppy, then don't invest in that puppy. Invest in kind of something that, that just really fits your needs. And then it can be a more efficient selection, implementation, and utilization process. We're going to talk through that process shortly. But if we're looking for a functional solution, it can be pretty quick. So when we're thinking about some of those challenges, if only if only our finance team is utilizing the technology, and they're really kind of the only ones who have access to that data. And so we might continue to see some of those silos. Sometimes the tracking and the reporting, right? So if I'm the CEO and I need to have kind of a financial snapshot and it all lives in QuickBooks, but I'm not a QuickBooks expert, I'm having to really rely on those 1 to 2 people to translate that data. And then certainly, if we have lots of small systems, that can add up. All right, so when we're thinking about a functional solution, are there a small number of processes? Is leadership comfortable with multiple systems? And so having to kind of go and say, okay, I need this client data from this team and I need this financial data from this team. And then will it grow and evolve with your organization? Sometimes those smaller technologies do, sometimes they don't. All right, and then we think about our legacy systems. And again, I'm not here to knock anybody's kind of tried and true systems, but most likely we all have them, right? It's something that has been there, what feels like since the beginning of time. It might have all of our historical data. We can also, when we think about the benefits of that, if we're ready to transition beyond, it can be a model for future systems. So, okay, here's the things that we really liked about our Microsoft Access database. Here are some things that were really challenging. And so you've already got a lot of those details already worked out. But we know that they can be really outdated. Sometimes the features are very limited. They're not coming with automatic updates and things like that. And so when we think about kind of sunsetting our legacy systems, you might need some expertise to export that data. That might be something that you talk with your new vendor about. You also might, before moving, think about how you might update or customize it. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. All right, so let's dive in really to the steps in selecting the right technology solution. And I know that it might feel a little silly, but I always love to share this quote from my brilliant colleague, Valerie. I was debriefing with her after a very particularly challenging client meeting, which involved a technology group that unfortunately just didn't have the right skill set. And she said to me, we learn so much when it all goes horribly wrong. And I loved that. I was really kind of wanting to lean into what can I take away from this? And so, and trust me, I've heard it all when it comes to technology challenges from nonprofits. And so my goal is to share what are some of those key learnings and ways that we can kind of lean into learning from our challenges and when it all goes horribly wrong. Okay, so here are the steps on a very high level and we're going to review each of these in more detail. So we're going to talk about how do we define our technology goals. These are not this is not yet the nitty gritty details of here's the functionality that I want from the database. What we're really focused here on, what are our goals and what are our organizational goals and how will this technology help us to meet those goals? We're going to talk about how we document our functional needs, and I'm going to share some resources related to that. We're also going to talk about how do you research and compare available technologies. This process can feel intimidating and daunting. There's a lot of information out there. And so we'll talk a bit about that process as well as highlight some specific places that you can go for even more details. Talk a little bit about how do you select the right fit, and then how do you launch that rollout and training. While our time today is mostly focused on the selection process, please do not overlook this. Have a rollout and a utilization plan for your staff. Do not make this big investment into technology and then let it sit on the shelf. That's just always unfortunate and challenging. All right, so let's talk about technology goals. What do you want the technology to do for your organization? What are you solving for? One of the biggest things that I have coached nonprofits on is really zeroing in on what the actual technology needs are. Do not mistake a technology need for a business or process problem. We're all guilty of it. We expect technology to kind of magically fix a challenge that doesn't actually have a technology solution. So it's not a silver bullet. Technology is a tool that can be used to, let's say, support or automate a process, but in and of itself, it's not going to create a process for you. And so let's talk about that in a little bit more detail. So technology, of course, is a very powerful tool, but it can't account for lack of staff buy-in. So again, we might have the most powerful, innovative technology tool available, but if our staff aren't bought in or excited about it or expected to use it, it will not solve our problem. Siloed workflows. So we've talked a bit about how tech enterprise and other technology solutions can help us to work across the different programs, departments, or teams. But you have to have a process for that already, right? If your marketing team has never met your finance team, or those two are not used to working together or have never had a reason to kind of connect, you're going to have to set that process up. We're going to have to think about, okay, well, when and where should this information be shared? Who should have access to the data? How will they get it? In what way? Unfortunately, technology is not a silver bullet for limited staff capacity. I think an example of that is, let's say, for example, you're looking for a technology solution to schedule and calendar your social media updates, right? Those are great tools where we can write out all of our tweets for the next 2 weeks. But a physical person has to be behind that writing the tweets, right? So you're curating content, you're setting goals related to how many views you get and things like that. So still very important that the staff is behind that. But again, it can help make the process more efficient. It also cannot make up for a lack of process. So if you have never had an individual giving program at your organization, and there is not a staff member who has it as part of their job responsibilities, Salesforce, no matter how many amazing tools they have, will not solve your problem. So create the process behind it, and then find or understand the process or challenge behind it, and then look for the technology solution. So when we think about our technology goals, and this can be a really kind of an ongoing and I think a fun process, we want to think about technology goals should be tied to a challenge, such as hey, it takes us hours to pull this report, or or a strategic goal for the organization. So, hey, we really want to have a more consistent online presence. And so we know that Hootsuite will be a really valuable tool in helping us meet that strategic goal. We should not be looking for a new technology because we heard Salesforce is super cool, or because that the nonprofit next door is using little green light and they increase their fundraising, right? It should be something that's either already keeping us at night, up at night, or something that we're really excited about, I think, is a simple way to kind of think about it. And then we also want to think about the utilization. So who would utilize the technology and how would they be trained? And then the process. So what's the process behind it? And these are questions that I always ask nonprofits as I'm doing as part of my consulting and assessment process. All right, well, what are you doing currently? How is that working? How is it not working? Do you want to replicate that process, improve it, or replace it? All right, and now we think about the functional requirements. So we're digging into the actual kind of technology, the tech pieces. So we recognize that we want a technology to grow our individual giving. So that's our organizational goal. But now we need to know, okay, look, what are those specific functions that we want the technology to do for us? So what are the kind of small details? So again, so we'll want to start our document, and I've got some examples of this for what is the purpose of the technology. So this is going to be our technology goal. So to track program outcomes, to automate social media posts. And then the functionality. So making an actual list, and this can be a long list at first, of all of the things you want, the specific things you want the technology to do. So we need it to have admin access versus user access so that volunteers don't see the back end. We need it to have data encryption because we have funder and client data within the system. So those are all of the different pieces of, again, all of the different things that we need the technology to do. This right here might be the most important part of the process, which is creating a document and it could be a PowerPoint, a Word document, an Excel document that best represents the needs of all of your stakeholders. And it accurately defines the scope of the technology. So it says what it will do and what it won't. And then it'll serve as a starting point for your research phase. So you have to have leadership buy-in. So the intern should not be leading this process, right? It should be somebody that has kind of the ability to call meetings and gather people together and really kind of get folks moving. You need to have a project lead, so somebody that's invested in the outcome. So you might have, for example, kind of the CEO priming the process to say, hey, we're looking for a new technology. We're creating a functional requirements document. Our admin is going to be the one who's kind of taking the lead in scheduling the meetings, but this has my full support. And this is an organizational priority. But you need to have a person that is kind of the lead in documenting everything. And then give all of your stakeholders, so your fundraising team, your marketing team, everybody that's going to interact with the technology, give them multiple opportunities for input. Okay, so sharing it both written and in a verbal way. Give them help for translating their needs into technical terms. So, I might not know that, I might even kind of say, oh, it'd be great if we could see who has given to our organization more than twice in the past 5 years. But then I know, and so let's translate that into, I hear you saying that you need customizable reports that track donor data over the course of a specific time. And so kind of helping with translating that. Not all staff are going to have that know-how. And that actually highlights number 4, which is create use cases. So in addition to thinking about the different things that you want the technology to do, create actual, and you'll hear they like to call them user stories now. Think about, okay, one of the use cases that I'll use is I have a client sitting at my desk and I need to see all of the programs that they've accessed within a very specific report. That's a use case. And so what are the different functions that you need the technology to do in order to complete that use case? And have each of your teams or departments come up with a few. And then revisit your challenge. Okay, so this might be a really snazzy new technology, but have we solved for this situation? And then make sure that you're reviewing it. All right, and then you'll want to prioritize your features. So what is a must-have and what's a nice to have? Unfortunately, we're still going to be operating within our budget realities. And so we'll want to really identify, okay, what is a make or break? Like it's absolutely, we absolutely have to be able to encrypt our data because of the fact that we have client data. But it'd be really cool if we could have a single sign-on so that when I sign on to Microsoft Office, I'm also signed into this new technology. And so you're unlikely to find something that's an absolutely perfect fit in every way, but that's a great way to prioritize. All right, and then just a few more slides because I'm recognizing that I am getting close to time. And I do want to make sure that we are leaving plenty of time for questions. And this is my plug to make sure that you do not forget to assess your existing technology. So I know I've been a bit hard on those legacy systems, but that doesn't mean that you don't have access to what you need in-house. So think about, I'm always amazed and impressed with Microsoft Office, for example. They have so many different apps and tools that I just wasn't always aware of. And so before we go out and purchase a document collaboration tool, let's really dive in and see how well we might be able to do that on OneDrive or SharePoint. And that's, again, just one example. So can you customize or update or integrate your existing technologies? All right, and then let's dive quickly into research. This part's really, I think we'll go pretty quickly. Use Google. I mean, really, it sounds very basic, but once you have a good handle on what you need, and that is you have gained a consensus on it, and it is documented, the research part is a bit time consuming, but should feel less daunting. So I've got even here some search terms that that I encourage you to use. So think about just the different like purposes and goals that you have, and then also use some search terms that are related to your functionality. So use terms like schedule volunteer shifts, customizable reports. You'll start to get a list of potential technology solutions, and then you'll be able to compare them as well. You also can ask for recommendations. So I'm in a couple, for example, Facebook groups for nonprofit leaders and technologists. And I ask them, hey, how have folks like Blackbaud? Or, hey, we're considering switching from Little Green Light, or those types of things. Ask your networks or staff, even your own staff that have worked at other organizations. I know I've shared some new and innovative ways that we might use Salesforce, for example, at my current role. All right, so a couple other places that I encourage you to look, and again, you'll have all of this. The Nonprofit Technology Network, I know there's even local groups, and so that is a great resource. TechSoup is a place where you actually can get free subscriptions in technology for some solutions. And then techimpact.org is another really great tool that I have utilized both to research technology and access templates and things like that. All right, so one of our final steps is then to compare our technologies, right? So we've done a ton of research. We've curated a list of kind of what are our top 3 choices. And you could do these 2 things in parallel, both a vendor sales demo and a priority list or a vendor selection matrix. This is also a tool that you'll be receiving at the end of this, which is a customizable vendor selection matrix, which allows you'll see here on the left side, we've put our features. So here's the things we need the technology to do. Here are the 3 top technologies that we're considering, and here's who can do what. The vendor selection matrix that will be shared with you will also have weighted scoring, and so it'll spit out kind of a score for you. The final step might be to schedule some vendor sales demos. Do not do this as your first step because they will Um, they'll show you all of these great features without you getting a real grounding in, okay, this, what you need and what you don't. I've been victim of that myself. So prepare yourself a script going into each of the sales demos. So let's say we're doing Salesforce, Blackbot, and Little Green Light. We want to ask the same questions because we're going to be expecting to kind of to execute the same processes within all of the technologies. So use the same use cases, use the same questions, take notes, record it if you can and if you're able. And then think about other things, like don't just ask questions related to the functionality, ask about rollout and implementation support. What is their ongoing training and support? Do you have to pay every time you call them for troubleshooting, or do you have a certain number of hours? Are there other variable costs? So, okay, we expect to grow our volunteer program by at least 100 new volunteers next year. How much will that cost if we have to add a license for each of those folks? Or if we need to customize these reports each month, does that cost us anything? Or is that something that's included kind of in our sales package? I'm going to very quickly just talk about implementation. Again, something that there's additional resources on. So clean up your data. That's always a question that I ask nonprofits, is I say, well, how clean is your data? So are you able to match the old fields to the new fields? So you might call it volunteer in your old database, and in your new database, it might be called supporter or stakeholder. So making sure that you understand kind of, if you're going to migrate data, what will it look like in that new system? Spend time ensuring that it's accurate and complete. This will be, if once you've done your selection and are working on implementation, this is typically the part that trips up the most nonprofits is, okay, we just have so much yucky data that we can't get it all into the new system. So, and don't migrate useless data. So, do you need to know every employee's start date from 25 years ago? Maybe you do, right? But if it doesn't have a job, then archive it. Don't pull it into your new system. And then, of course, very quickly, prepare and support your staff. Do not make that huge investment and then let it sit on the shelf. Okay, so keep staff updated on the progress as well. Hey, thanks so much for all of your feedback. We're now running our budget by the board, and we're in the process of selecting from our final 3. Provide regular, ongoing trainings and learning opportunities. Whoever your project lead is, maybe they're even creating an intranet site where user manuals or screenshots are saved. Do in-person trainings or webinars at your office that are mandatory for all staff. And again, have that leadership top-down buy-in. Okay, even if you can get your CEO to be corny and talk about how much they're loving Little Green Light, but again, it just utilization of technology can be part of your culture. So even thinking about it as a culture opportunity, and setting expectations. Hey, you are expected to make your updates in Salesforce by end of day on Wednesday, so that our CEO can track those on Thursday mornings. And then use those support resources. Honestly, you would be absolutely amazed at how robust user manuals and support resources are and how underutilized they are. You can likely Google a solution to almost any problem that you might have with your technology. Now, of course, that's not a one-size-all-fits approach, but use all of the resources at your disposal. And I'm not going to go over these in detail because I'm recognizing that I'm at time. But just so you know, I've highlighted what I think are some really, really helpful blogs and lists from the Nonprofit Technology Network that I really encourage you all to take a look at as you're embarking on this process. And one final time, let's review those steps. Define your technology goals. So this should be a business challenge or a strategic goal for your organization. This is not just a, hey, we think Salesforce would be really cool to have, okay? Or we heard Salesforce is free, so let's implement it. Document those functional needs. Do not skimp on this part of the process. Make that long list and prioritize your features. Make sure that you gain consensus on what you need the technology to do. And then research and compare those available technologies. Utilize all of those kind of research resources at your disposal. Select the best fit. The best fit for your organization is not the best fit for my organization, is not the best fit for folks down the street. What works best for you, given all of those different factors that we discussed? And then launch that rollout and training. Don't just implement the technology and let it sit on a shelf. You put all this work in, okay? And so make sure that you're utilizing that really powerful tool at your disposal. All right, thank you so much, and thanks for bearing with me as I as I went a bit over time. I am going to pause there and invite Danielle to fire some questions at me.
Thank you very much, Margie. That was a really comprehensive conversation on how to select the right technology for an organization. And there's so much to it. You mentioned in this forum that selecting the care that goes into selecting your technological solution is a lot like the care that you would put into selecting the right candidate for a position. And I think that not only is that true, but it even seems like it could be more involved than that, because there's so much interconnection between existing people and positions and responsibilities that this technology will need to fit into. So at this time, I will say that if I have come up with some questions, and we also received some questions in the chat box, and I'll ask if those folks can kind of throw those into the Q&A box, but I will take a scan of the chat box to make sure I haven't missed anything. The first question I want to ask you is for our small and medium-sized nonprofits who desire to scale at some point in their future, but are not at that point yet. And they know they need a technological solution. They've identified that that the processes that they do would benefit from this boost. How would you advise them to go about selecting? Do we start with an enterprise solution? Do we start with something and plan to migrate in the future?
Oh gosh, that is such a good question, and it's a tough question because I'll say again, and I'll try to share a little bit more specific, but you know, there's no one size fits all approach. I would say think about what your strategic priorities are as an organization, right? Are those processes likely to grow or change? And take a look at your strategic plan, right? So are you likely to for example, greatly expand your currently small volunteer program? Or are you likely to continue to operate with a core group of 10 to 20 volunteers? In that case, you know, that Volgistics is still probably going to be the right solution for now and for 3 to 5 years from now. You know, I think that the 3 to 5 year time frame is a good one. And that's what I have heard, you know, we typically hear from technologists is that you want to look for those 3 to 5 years. And so I think, you know, as a first step, again, look at your strategic plan, look at your strategic priorities, think about what is likely to grow. Okay, so if, you know, Constant Contact, I think is great in terms of that's a functional solution. It's a pretty simple one. Well, it can be simple, it can be complex, but, you know, it can work if you have a distribution list of 50 all the way to 10,000. Okay, so think about, you know, okay, if even if we are going to approach this as a functional solution, will it grow? Do I expect this program or process to grow? If you expect your processes, okay, so your intake process or your, you know, the way that you process individual gifts or sponsorships, if you expect that to change significantly as you grow or evolve as an organization, then, you know, that might be a time that you would more look into an enterprise solution because of the fact that a lot of times those individual or functional solutions are unlikely to be as customizable as you might need. And so I would encourage folks again to just think about some of those use cases, both around process change and organizational growth. and if the technologies that you're reviewing can meet those.
So one of the things that I really love hearing from you that you're highlighting is that we often think of technology as a solution to a problem because we call it a technology solution, but you're really emphasizing the plan piece, that when we are in that 3 to 5 year strategic planning process, we need to also be evaluating our technological needs. What are they at their present state, the current state, and what will we need as we progress through our strategic plan? So it's a lot more thoughtful than thinking, oh, this is a pain point in a process that I have, and let me plug this hole with a technological solution. So we have a couple of questions here. One says, different funders require us to use their own data systems, and it becomes a burden for staff, it's duplicative and time consuming. How can an enterprise model solve this kind of solution?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that you can get a much better answer from a data architect or a specific technologist. I think a couple, and Daniel, I'd love your perspective on this as well, for how much we can kind of share back with our funders, how onerous and laborious this process of really custom reports and reporting can be. I know I'll use Salesforce or Blackbaud. Those enterprise solutions are typically highly customizable, and that should be part of, and a very important part of, your selection process. And so you might even think about, okay, so we'll have 5 different funders that require quarterly reports. And so as part of our selection and then implementation process, we would expect the vendor to kind of set up those customizable reports, or I'm sorry, those templated reports, and then train us on how we customize them. And so that's likely something where you might have an enterprise solution like a Salesforce, let's say, and you've got 1 or 2 people that are very skilled or really skilled and experienced and can do those customized reports very well. So again, you heard me really hammer home on the fact that everybody using it should be comfortable with it. That's not to say that that you're not going to have folks on your staff and team that are really skilled in specific aspects of it. And actually, Salesforce reporting is a very great example of that. And so I think that's a situation where I think it ties a little bit back to that previous question of, okay, we're seeing this trend of custom reports back to funders. That's probably not going to change in the next 5 years. And so let's find a solution that we can easily customize. And are we thinking about, okay, so Blackbaud, I'm using just an example here. Blackbaud comes with 10 hours of customized support each year, and Salesforce doesn't. So I'm thinking that Blackbaud might be a better solution for us because one of our big pain points is those custom reports.
So I'll answer a little bit of this too. I'm sorry that this question has to even be asked, because the goal is that you're out there doing the work of your organization as opposed to accommodating specificities across multiple funding sources, be that as the reality of the present. As you said, Margie, I think that really being able to lean on those custom supports and tailoring how you input the information that you're getting. So how you enter those data points so that they're as flexible as possible when it's time to pull your queries. So as opposed to, one of the things from my own background, as opposed to, combining a bunch of large concepts into one data point, getting those as granular as possible when you put the data into your system allows you better flexibility on what types of questions you can ask when it's time to query the system that you choose. Mm-hmm. But I sincerely hope that to be a short-term solution, whereas globally funders are able to align more in the types of things that are required for reporting. with that, I want to follow up with a question that I have, and I think it aligns with what you're talking about, those folks that are experts. In my past life, those folks were called super users, and they are the people in your organization that are typically boots on the ground, both in the process that the technology connects to and also with the technology itself. Can you talk a little bit about identifying super users for your process and what that looks like?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. And so that's a term that was utilized when I was with an organization. So we had a group that was called the Salesforce super users. And so we were responsible kind of both within the organization leadership was intentional about ensuring that each department or team had at least one super user. This was not an official certification or designation, but just kind of an internal term that we used. But it really came from understanding the different ways that we would need to utilize the system. And so we would, again, kind of think about what are those, and you could think about buckets, right? Like buckets of work that you might use within a system. So we've got the data entry. So that's a bucket of work. And that's likely kind of also included in the reporting. So, inputting and getting out and pulling out data, right? That can be kind of one bucket. Utilize communication tools, right? So how are we kind of tracking the contact information for all of our for all of our stakeholders, and what does that look like? Is it clean? Right, that's another bucket of work. And then a third bucket of work might be donorship or giving. And so in being sure that there was both somebody who was an expert in those types, in those buckets of work, and that they then were also meeting as a group. So we're passing along key learnings. We're also making sure that we're not making decisions in silos. And so Danielle, to your point as well, when we think about things that can be highly customized, that can be so helpful. But if I change a data field in Salesforce because I need it, because I'm part of the fundraising team, and it changes data for our clients or changes a designation for a volunteer, that is going to create a huge headache. So, those groups kind of, or I'm sorry, those individuals really serving as a representative of their bucket of work, and then being responsible to kind of work together to both share best practices as well as kind of talk about any changes or customizing that might need to be done. I think the other piece of that is documentation. That is never my favorite part, to like literally write out a 13-page manual on how to create a content pack in Salesforce. But if I win the lottery and don't come to work tomorrow, at least somebody can figure out how to muddle their way through it. And also, hey, I'm on the development team and I don't really understand the report, but okay, I can kind of muddle through because Danielle has documented it really well. And so that'll help me gain kind of a little bit of an understanding. And then I think, along with that, use the trainings that are available. Salesforce, I know I keep mentioning them, and I do not mean to kind of recommend that because, again, find your fit. But they have so many. They have free meetups. They have what's called the Trailblazer, which is free for nonprofits. So you can get basically a Salesforce certification for practically free if you use their on-demand trainings. And so, if that's everybody's responsibility, then it's not going to get done. But if it's one person's responsibility to become an expert in reporting, then it likely, it's more likely to get done.
So you are bringing up Salesforce a lot, which is not a plug for Salesforce, but I'm going to go with this for a second because I think it will illustrate one of the other questions that we got. One of the things that I hear most about Salesforce, which you brought up, is that you're getting a free puppy, but that free puppy that you're getting will then need, doctor's visits, specialized food, et cetera, et cetera. And so Salesforce, as our example, has the difficulty of implementation. of migrating onto Salesforce. Can you talk a little bit about the expense of enterprise solutions versus content-specific solutions and the potential hidden costs that are often buried in those?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And I think we also have to think about time, right? Time as a cost, a significant amount of time. And that goes back a little bit to kind of how clean is your data, but also, are you really clear about the processes? Um, if hopefully, if we put a lot of this work in ahead, we've discussed as a team our different use cases. We've gotten the input from our boots on the ground folks. So the folks that are like literally kind of putting the tablet in front of our clients and walking them through how to fill out the intake form, or they're taking that paper form and inputting the data. So we understand what their challenges are, as well as the CEO, all the way up, all as well as the CEO saying, I need to be able to quickly access these four pieces. So I need these four pieces of data. And so I need that dashboard. And so we have to talk through all of those different use cases. We do not want, and unfortunately it happens, right? But where we see the biggest kind of hidden cost or resource drain is when we go to implement the technology and something comes up that we have not even thought of. Do we have to have a user? We have to have I heard a story recently of a large organization that needed certain data on all their volunteers. And so they wanted all their volunteers to go to this certain site and put in their employee ID number. Well, volunteers don't have employee ID numbers, but the CEO who sits in San Francisco wouldn't have realized that, right? So that shows us we just weren't getting the input. And so when you think about hidden costs, again, that data. So if you are exporting any data, you have to go through a process of cleaning it. This tends to be, again, the biggest barrier or backlog that can stop a project dead in its tracks, unfortunately. So cleaning up that data, ensuring that folks in your organization understand, we're not going to understand every single field and every single piece, but understanding kind of, okay, here is where and how we track the donor data. And here is where and what it will look like within our new system. So you've got kind of that implementation piece, but then I think just the initial and the ongoing training. So understanding, and you can even in one of the resources that will be shared afterwards, you'll also see even some crude diagrams that folks have written out for, okay, here's how the data flows into the system. So it's almost like you're drawing your process and then finding the solution to fit that process. So we're not kind of finding a great technology and then creating a new process to support that technology. We are finding the solution to fit our process. And we don't want to identify once we've implemented the technology, this is kind of the other, I think, big challenge. Once we've implemented the technology, we don't want to identify, oh, we don't have a process for that. It's great that Salesforce, for example, can send, or QuickBooks can send an automatic receipt to donors, but who tracks that? Whose responsibility is that currently? And who's going to make sure that it gets done or ensure that, that toggle is turned on? So knowing your process, knowing your challenges, and knowing your use cases are just so important.
And so I think we will have time for just one more question. And I want to go back to the point you made around essentially the change management within the organization, the people change management. And you discussed two tiers of folks that need to be understood. The boots on the ground folks who are working in the process day to day, but also that leadership buy-in for any of the technologies that are brought on board. Can you speak a little bit to what type of groundwork needs to be done prior to even engaging in this process to get your organization ready, the people ready?
Yeah, that is great. That's a really great question. And again, part of the challenges that we see, right? I can't tell you how many times I've seen, and I've been guilty of it myself and with organizations. Again, we've made this Massive investment. We've done our research. Now we have this great tool and it sits on the shelf. And so I really encourage organizations to approach it as a culture shift. So make the utilization of the technology part of your culture. Mention it in team meetings. Make it part of job functions. So even, you just, hey, one of your expectations as, the data coordinator is to input data within 24 hours of the meeting or whatever that might be. So tying it to specific job functions. That top-down approach, I think, is really also important. And I certainly don't mean to discount the immense amount of strategy work that our leadership, leaders of nonprofits are doing, right? So not necessarily expecting that they're going to be absolute experts, but for them to utilize it, again, for them to encourage it to be part of the culture. And also to be very planful, right? So we invested a lot of time into identifying, and we created this functional requirements document. We've got our vendor selection matrix. Like we've got all of this documentation. Let's document a utilization and a rollout plan. This was one of my favorite projects that I ever got to work on because I thought, wow, I just loved their approach with a nonprofit wanting to work with a group of pro bono volunteers to create a rollout plan. So day one is going to look like this. Day two is going to look like this. These are the dates that the marketing team is going to be trained. And so really having even a training schedule, user manuals, and reinforcing kind of where those are, having the CEO at all part of your implementation plan, even just having, I've been part of organizations that have said, hey, we just rolled out this new feature. I'd like for everybody before the end of the day to go in and input this piece of data, right? Just so that we've got a little bit of repetition. And so thinking about it like both a culture shift and implementing a new policy. So what would HR do if you implemented kind of a brand new dress code, right? Like they would roll it out, they'd, have meetings, all of that stuff. Treat it as you would any significant change of process or program. And it's also just a lot about repetition, right? Like if you're hearing Salesforce every day, you're finally going to go into Salesforce and you're going to input your data because nobody will stop talking about it.
That is very helpful. It really, one of the things I think we've seen in our sector is the adoption of new technologies very quickly because of the need to pivot during the pandemic. So lots of new technologies were adopted without necessarily the infrastructure or the planfulness that one would need to do it right. And so now we're kind of backfilling those steps around how to make a smoother transition. And I think a lot of our leaders really they don't want to do a heavy-handed approach to adopting a new technology. So, we see it happen more as, well, use this if you choose, use this if this works for your workflow, which can sometimes create a disconnect in how people work together. So really thinking through the adoption far before you get to the tool you're going to use, looking at it in that strategic plan, which unfortunately we didn't have the ability to do prior to the pandemic. But now we know going forward, plan that as far back in your strategic plan as possible. Start talking about it at that point. Start talking about the people who will interact with those technologies far in advance of selecting it. And involve as many people as you can in that selection process so that we all know where we're headed next. Thank you so much, Margie, for bringing your knowledge here today. I'm grateful for it. This is an excellent forum. I want to tell the folks who are still on the line to please be looking into your inboxes for the post-forum resources that Margie graciously is providing. There will also be a link to view this after the fact. So if you want to share this with your staff members, share this with your colleagues, with your network, you can use that link to do that. Additionally, there will be a survey link that's included in that email that tells us how we're doing and how we can better serve you with the nonprofit forum. So please keep an eye out on that. In addition to that, please be on the lookout for other emails. We're going to have a forum a month. So keep your inbox open for those as well. And with that, we'll close out today. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you.